live now. I don't know if this can come on the screen or not. At least we'll be recording this for posterity. So, Pastor Rhee, how are you tonight? Oh, maybe you can't hear me. Hello. There. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
All right. This is a little bit loud there. Okay. How are you tonight, Pastor Rhee?
I'm good. Hi, how are you, Nate? Good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've seen each other really in person, but it's nice been catching up with you online and watching what's going on. It feels like a lot of online stuff is happening. All this COVID stuff keeps us kind of isolated, right?
For sure. So much happening in the world right now. It's kind of crazy.
That's right. So, just wondering, like, what's the atmosphere like at your church? Are things feeling
It's good where everyone's taking things very cautiously, carefully, just step by step. As you know, most churches have been closed for 2 months. It kind of seems like um, we go in waves, and it seems like COVID-19 has actually taken a little bit of a backseat to the whole BLM movement and the riots and the looting happening in America and stuff going on in Hong Kong and things happening all over the world. And almost seems like COVID-19 is like yesterday's news in a sense, But I think we reached a tipping point on around March 10th, and then with steady decline in new cases. There are actually several days that passed with zero recorded deaths, and Korea was doing pretty well with accolades all over the world saying that Korea's doing it right and we're doing things well and things like that. But just when we thought everything was over, um, and things were going to return to normal life, the whole Itaewon Club thing broke out, the coupon clusters, the mandatory 14-day quarantine, all of those things started coming up again, and so all the non-renewable visas for foreigners, that became a whole issue. And then just in early May, as the government restrictions were about to ease, and churches have been slowly opening back up. Our church opened up as well, and so I'm sure yours as well. And so we've opted for a hybrid service, providing physical gathering as well as online streaming, live streaming, and everybody who comes has to take precautions like registering to attend service. We have temperature checks and hand sanitizer at the door. We have to sign waivers. Everyone signs waivers, including things like they haven't shown flu-like symptoms or have been in contact with those showing symptoms. And our worship style overall has changed as well. Just very simplified, shorter messages, no passing of offering plates, no sharing snacks, or even taking communion. And so even during the greeting time, it's we just turn to each other and we do a friendly nod. And when my people complain that they have to wear masks to church, I tell them, even before Corona, you've been wearing a mask anyways. And so it's just a physical thing. And so, yeah, it's I think our church, a lot of churches are slowly getting back into the rhythm of things. What the future entails is yet to be seen, and what we still have to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, my church, I mean, I go to a much larger church, but yeah, we have QR codes that you actually can use, and it's, yeah.
So high tech, man.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting way to think about. We have to show our QR code, but they're doing the same kind of stuff, with, checking the temperatures, and we have to sanitize our hands and that kind of thing.
Sure.
And yeah, it's really tough to have like small group meetings, and there's something. It feels like there's something missing. I mean, personally, I feel like something is missing from the community aspect of it.
Absolutely. I
So,
mean,
yeah,
after all, the Bible is, the Bible, the phrase "one another" is found like 60 times in the New Testament, at least. Love one another, serve one another, care for one another, and even greet one another, put up with one another. You can't do that when you're online. You can't do that in a Zoom meeting, or when you're, trying to worship through a Facebook feed or whatever, And so this whole one another thing, Hebrews chapter 10:25 says, "Let's not give up meeting together." Some are in the habit of doing, and so just that whole communal aspect of church is taken out, and what are you left with is kind of the question that a lot of the pastors have been wrestling with.
yeah, very true. Yeah, it feels like that. So,
Basically, the reason I wanted to do this stream was actually because you were interviewed on was it TBS EFM for a kind of live stream. They were broadcasting on radio too, I think, right? So it felt like you didn't get enough time. They covered so much ground on that live stream, and it feels like you needed some more room to breathe so you could expand on the things that. Oh, how long was that? That was like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I think. It
About
felt
12 minutes.
It felt like 2 or 3 minutes, considering how much ground you were covering. So, yeah. Anyway, it's hold on. I'm trying to check everything here, make sure everything's running here properly. Okay, good. Yeah. So basically, first the thing, there's a couple topics I wanted to cover. First one is it's Shinchoenji. Shinchoenji was one of the most important things that came out during the initial outbreaks during Korea. So during the first initial outbreaks in Korea, and what I found was that I'm reading online comments about this issue. I'm reading what people are talking about, and there was actually quite a lot of anti-religious sentiment coming from that, and they took Shincheonji and then expanded it to some other religions, like Christianity or just religious gatherings in general, and made it about how religion is kind of responsible for some of this stuff. And so personally, I was like, okay, how do we deal with this as a church? How can we explain to people what the difference is between Shincheonji and true Christianity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for the average person outside, Shincheonji, church, gathering, worship, God is all in the same boat, and they just kind of lump everything together. They don't know the difference between Shincheonji and a real church. And, any church or religious organization that deviates from the gospel or adds or subtracts from the Bible is, you have to, investigate, is this really a cult? Is this a genuine church? And the name Shincheonji actually comes from the book of Revelation. It translates from Korean as the new heaven and the new earth. And their official name is the Shincheonji Church of Jesus, the Temple of the Tabernacle of the Testimony. And so people get confused. People get confused thinking that this is a church, but it's not, And they basically believe that their 88-year-old founder, Lee Man-hee, is the second coming, is Christ, the second coming of Christ. And only he is able to decipher and interpret the metaphors in the Bible. And only he is able to interpret, especially when it comes to Revelations and the end times. He's the only one, and his interpretation is the only right interpretation. And so, it's kind of funny. They're one of the biggest cults in Korea. They have over 200,000 members. But then they take the literal verse about the day of judgment in Revelation. They take it literally, saying that there'll be 144,000 saved. But then you're thinking, wait a minute, but then they have over 200,000 members. And so, they kind of twist the Bible to say, well, we'll try to include everybody. And they kind of, surpass that. They kind of hide that in the background. But, they're a very aggressive group. They have very deceptive, manipulative, proselytizing practices. And but people think that they're just a regular church, but they're not. They're very manipulative, they're very controlling. And the reason why it spread in the Shincheonji churches was because many of they're forced to wear the same clothes, sit for hours and hours in worship in the same position, tightly packed together in close quarters. And so it's no wonder that through this cult that the virus spread so quickly, and through their contacts and stuff like that. And so one of the super spreaders was included in as one of the worshipers of this cult. And so it's kind of like the background with Shincheonji.
Yeah, I heard that they aren't allowed to wear masks actually during their during the services. This was before Corona started, but you weren't ever allowed to wear masks. And I heard a couple other things about how they actually required you to attend services. Did you read anything about that?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. You're required. You're pretty much required to attend almost every day some kind of Bible study or some kind of meeting. It's very controlling. They make you feel it's very guilt driven. And but at the same time, they're very secretive, which is why everything was undercover, and they weren't able to track down all the members because they didn't know who the members actually were.
Right, and I remember reading a few news articles talking about what was happening in Daegu, and it was the until the person's virus status came out, they didn't find out about the person's membership in this
Right.
organization. So I mean, there were a couple of like I think it was people in the health administration and a couple other parts of government that were part of this group. And so you were saying that they actually have some deceptive evangelism tactics. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh, sure. They're very aggressive. They will not come out and say that they're part of Shincheonji. They will actually use a lot of other names like heavenly culture. They'll use words like world peace, restoration of light, the Manam Volunteer Association. They have like a dozen different names that they go under. Yeah. And so even there is right next to our church in Shincheon, there is an international branch of Shincheonji, which has a totally different name. But when you walk in, it's just like a church. It feels just like a church. And you know that for a lot of internationals who come to Korea, they're very lonely. They want community. And then when they approach you and they say, "Oh, we want to invite you to a Bible study," and I know this because they have very deceptive practices in inviting someone to Bible study. They will not reveal that they're Shincheonji until much later. And by then, you're already sucked in, and it's already too late. And so I had a member in my church who didn't know, and she just wanted a weekday Bible study to get involved with. She got invited, and then they got her address, all of her information. They got where she lived and everything. And once she found out and she was Shincheonji, she tried to pull out, but they were very aggressive with her. They would follow her home. They knew where she lived. And so they would wait for her after work at the subway station. She had to move houses just in order to avoid them, just to make sure that she wasn't followed. Another very close friend of mine, it's a sad story, but he was deceived into marrying. He was a future pastor. He's one of my staff many years ago. And one day he told me, "Pastor Leo, I'm getting married." And I was really happy for him. And I was thinking that this was a great girl. I only met her a couple times. And then later found out that she was a Shincheonji member. And she was trying to recruit him to become a Shincheonji pastor. And she told him that if she didn't convert to Shincheonji, that she would divorce him. And ultimately they did end up separating. And it was a really sad story, but he went through a really difficult time because of that, because he was torn between his wife and his faith. And so, we've actually had, Shincheonji is very good at infiltrating churches. And so they'll go in and they'll create chaos and division and turmoil and doubt, and they'll build their own, little group within a church. And so that's why when you go to a lot of Korean churches these days, they'll have signs out in the front door saying that Shincheonji are not allowed because they're so aggressive. And we've actually had Shincheonji members come to our church as well and try to start their own Bible study or recruit people from our church. We're very sensitive to this. We've been aware. I do know of a church in the Gangnam area where Shincheonji members infiltrated and the church no longer exists because they cause so much division and chaos within the church. And so what happens? They're very good at it. They're experts at causing this kind of chaos and division. And a lot of times what will happen is that once the church is about to close down, Shincheonji members will come in, take over the church, and they will actually purchase the church and take over the church building. And I've seen that happen as well. And so it's a scary practice.
It's a long-term plan for them, really. They're not just they're not messing around at all. They're not just trying to poke little holes. They've got real goals that span multiple years that it takes to do that kind of work.
They've become expert, very strategic, very intentional with what they're doing. And so not only here in Korea, but all over the world.
Right. One of the things that I heard during the outbreak of the initial outbreak of the virus and the Shincheonji discoveries was that one of the reasons that regular churches wanted to shut down was because of the evangelism practices of Shincheonji. So can you say something about that?
Nate, you're breaking up a little bit. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Hold on.
You were breaking up a little bit.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, maybe it's just our connection. I mean, I'm using a lot of data here to stream our videos here.
Sure.
So during the initial outbreak, I heard that one of the reasons that churches were very happy to close their doors and to go to online actually had to do with the aggressive evangelism tactics of Shincheonji. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons why churches did close down was because people still saw, I think in Korea overall, especially amongst the younger generation, churches have a negative connotation. It leaves a bad taste in people's mouths to begin with. And so in order for them not to be associated with Shincheonji, they actually did close down. Many of them did close down because of the whole Shincheonji outbreak, because they wanted to show the government that we want to comply with government regulations and government mandates. We want to show the government that we will listen and that whatever, and so I think they wanted to fulfill their civil responsibility in following what the government mandated in order so that they could kind of support the government, be with the government so that they wouldn't fall under the same umbrella as Shincheonji. Because Shincheonji was so secretive, they weren't willing to give out, membership listing. They weren't willing to give out like who attended. Because it was such a secretive group, the church was saying, well, we're not going to follow in that same step. And so they were very, very careful. And I think the churches in general did a very good job in trying to separate themselves from the whole, from what Shincheonji was and what they were doing.
Yeah, I think one of my concerns was that actually because of aggressive. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I think it was good because this whole outbreak unveiled who Shincheonji really was. It unveiled like all of the secretiveness and all the things that they were doing behind the scenes, and they actually did this whole outbreak revealed like the true heart of Shincheonji and what they were all about. Nobody knew. People thought they were just another church. And so, it kind of made people realize, a lot of people were surprised. Oh, I thought it was another church, but no, it made people realize that this is a cult, this is different. And, but, still in the general mindset of somebody who doesn't go to church, people still think that Shincheonji and church are the same thing. It's from different, things that I've been reading and news that I watch online and things like that.
Yeah, one of my personal concerns was that the members of Shincheonji would not stop evangelizing and trying to infiltrate churches during this period, which was a potential health risk considering how many people from Shincheonji had actually contracted the coronavirus. So I thought that was another reason for kind of trying to go to online services, and it did serve, like you said, the sort of civil responsibility purpose, and also the defining the church and as different from the Shincheonji, but also protecting church members from getting the coronavirus potentially spread by the secretive tactics of evangelism that Shincheonji usually does.
Sure. Right. And it's kind of interesting that, later on, when they were trying to figure out like who was attending the gay bars or who was attending, who was patroning the gay clubs and things like that in Itaewon, in the early years, they had to find out who was there at the Shincheonji worship. But then when they were trying to figure out who was there at the Itaewon clubs, it's kind of interesting that people didn't want to come forward because they didn't want to reveal, their sexual identity. They didn't want to reveal that they were at the clubs. And so the government came back and said, okay, we'll keep it anonymous. We'll make sure that you're protected and that people don't know, and you could come anonymously and share your information. And then even with a lot of the foreigners who are here illegally, the undocumented foreigners who are here, the aliens who are here illegally, they were giving them time to stay, and if you show who you are, then we'll give you a grace period and stuff like that.
Yeah, they were giving them amnesty for overstays and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I remember that. So it's kind of an interesting difference there, that they were people. Actually, I remember reading articles where people were demanding that Shincheonji itself be shut down.
Right.
And they were demanding
there was Right. There was a petition that went around. 1 million people signed this petition saying that they should actually shut down, and that the government should actually by force shut them down because of what they did.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've covered Shincheonji quite a bit. I think that explains most of the stuff that I wanted to talk about with them in particular. But I mean, Shincheonji, I've been approached, I'm pretty sure, by Shincheonji or some other organization. I think Manam at least has once or twice talked to me But I mean, this isn't just a Shincheonji thing, from what I understand. I feel like there's Korea has sort of, at least among the foreigner community and the church community, I've sort of gotten the impression that there are a lot of sort of deceptive cults, like the cults. There's these, or some of these weird, deceptive organizations that will try to take advantage of foreigners or take advantage of people in general. So I'm wondering if you could speak to cults in Korea more in general.
Yeah, somebody once said that Korea has more cults and different sects and religions than any other place in the world, and I believe that when during the Korean War they were saying that every religion in the world is represented in Korea, and there are all of these cults that do exist on the fringes of society, and I think Korea in a way is set up so that cults can thrive, because cults provide a sanctuary for those who are striving for a sense of identity and belonging. A lot of people can't get that. They don't belong. They feel left out. They don't have that. And Korea is a very a community-based society. And there's this conformist mentality that reigns over individualism. And if you're all alone, you're kind of an outsider. You're kind of a loser. And so everybody, all the Confucian values and things like filial piety, it all supports this whole notion of follow a leader, and we belong to a family. We're all one, and we're all together. And so a cult leader comes in and says, "Follow me. I will protect you. I'll take care of you." And people eat it up, and they'll follow even blindly, because they feel loved and they feel protected. They feel covered, and they feel like they have a sense of family and community. And no matter how weird or far-fetched their teachings might be, Korean society in general is very community-oriented, and everything is based on relationship and who you know and what group you belong to. And so when a cult group offers this to you, you just feel like, wow, now I'm part of something. It's kind of like a gang mentality. I'm part of a gang now. And no matter what the gang tells me to do, as long as I belong to a family and a group, I feel comfortable. And so, I think Confucianism, with this culture of belonging, and then everybody's competing for the same thing. Everyone's competing. This sense of just rough, very harsh, aggressive competitiveness. It just wears down on a person, and people need that kind of community, and they find it in cult groups.
Right, and it seems like the cult groups are specifically sensitive to that. They're taking advantage of that. I mean, that's why they know who to look for. They look for foreigners. And
absolutely.
I kind of remember that the times when I was approached by cult members happened to be usually on holidays, like before a big holiday, Korean holiday, or before an American holiday, or whatever, any kind of holidays where foreigners would be tempted to feel lonely, or they wouldn't know, or maybe they're just looking for something to do. And sometimes these cults would pose as just kind of a social organization.
Sure.
And the thing is, like, I wonder if there's a kind of continuum between cults and social groups, because I feel like there's some social groups that I've joined that the leader seems to have a particular worldview, and part of it, it's not like this isn't a cult, but it feels like part of what they're trying to inculcate in you as part of the group. Usually in a benign way, at least in this group I joined, it was kind of a hiking group, but the leader has a particular religious view. I think he's Buddhist or something. So we would hear a lot about Buddhism, and then we would go to the temples, and they would talk about Buddhism and nature, because we're going into nature, and it's like, yeah, that's fine. I understand that. But I wonder if there's a kind of continuum there too.
Sure. I mean, a lot of the cult groups will do the same thing under the guise of, social interaction, hiking, soccer game, foreigners meeting. You've probably been approached by some of these cults who say, we want to teach you about Korean culture. And then I've had church members who are invited to learn about Korean culture, and then they do a tea ceremony, and they talk to them, and then they ask for like a 5,000 won donation or whatever, and then they want more information from them. They get this information, and then they slowly bring them in. Like you said, the cult groups know that Chuseok, Lunar New Year are very lonely times for foreigners. This family time, this is when all Korea goes to their homes and spend time with their family. And many of the foreigners and all the restaurants are closed. And these days it's a little bit different, but even 10 years ago, once Chuseok, Lunar New Year hit, everything closed down. Nobody worked, everything was shut down. And a lot of these foreigners felt very lonely. They felt very out of touch. They felt very alone by themselves. And so they want to fit in somewhere. And so a lot of these cult groups would organize these, cultural games or, peace games or peace Olympics or whatever to get these foreigners involved. And to be honest, having foreigners in your group is kind of like good window dressing. It legitimizes your organization. Wow, look at us. We have foreigners in our group. That must mean that we're doing something right. And it looks nice. It looks good that we are an international organization now.
Yeah, there's that kind of the globalization. There was that whole thing in the 80s and 90s about Korea needs to globalize, and I feel like even churches are doing that. I mean, the gospel has something to say about that, why that should be true for churches in general, but even the cults are trying to use the cultural cachet of having foreigners and in their photos in the congregation.
Oh yeah, they'll push you up to the front so that the camera could get a good shot of you and things like that. Window dressing, like I said.
Kind of tokenism.
That's right. Look at us. We're legitimate now. We're global. We're international.
It
that kind of
feels
thing.
very odd to be a kind of token white person. Honestly, I've been in a couple of those situations, and I thought, is this even possible? Does it even make sense in terms of cultural history? I don't think I can really count as a token, but maybe. But it was an interesting experience for me. And you're right. I think, me too. I've been here 12 years now, and I've seen some changes definitely in terms of how things like that are dealt with. And I think one of the things that has really probably hurt cults online is now the foreigner community here is really vibrant and communicative. I find that really interesting. I mean, maybe you've seen it, but like we're using social media now, and Facebook has had, when Facebook came out, that was maybe 2007 or 2006, and in Canada it was 2007, I think. But now it's been about 12 years where Facebook has been available in Korea, and anybody can join. And so that's built up a kind of wealth of knowledge, right, of things that are happening. So I notice people are posting like, be careful of this cult in online foreigner groups. All right, so what else that I wanted to talk about here? So this was kind of prophetic. I sent you these notes to have a look at, and the picture. Do you remember the picture that I had in the notes from The Guardian?
I'm sorry, I don't. Okay. Was it? Did you send a link? Was that it?
Yeah, it was in the link, but the picture shows Lotte World. This was like a couple weeks ago. It has a Lotte World, and there's a whole bunch of young people. Not wearing masks at Lotte World. This was a couple of weeks ago. So I thought, wow, this is almost prophetic that we have this picture of people. And then on this past weekend, right, you heard about Lotte World had some problem with some confirmed person walking around there. So but the reason that I wanted to bring both of these things up is that there was another article talking about they surveyed young Koreans having a tendency to believe that their ability to catch COVID is related to luck. So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect was they also fear the stigma of coming down with the disease. So this is kind of getting into the more faith versus fear, and how should we think about COVID-19 as individuals and as individual church members when we consider how to act in public, in front of our peers, at work, at church. What do you think about that attitude from the survey, and then how should we think about these things as believers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. This whole question of faith versus fear, we struggled with it and wrestled with it a lot. And our civic responsibility versus our spiritual protection, and if we believe in God, won't He protect us and won't He watch over us? And we have to put our faith in God that He's gonna look after us. But at the same time, why do we wear safety belts when we drive or put on helmets when we cycle? Is the question that we wrestled with. And on the other hand, we don't want to be reckless with leading our congregation. We want to lead our congregations with love for our members, humility, and also the church is a witness in the world, and we don't want to tarnish this reputation that's already pretty bad to begin with. A lot of the young people view church as a business, as a corrupted, as a money maker, as manipulative and controlling. And to be honest, the Korean church has been on the decline for the past 20 years. And it just leaves and you look at a lot of the churches, especially the mega churches these days, there are a lot older people, and then the youth are no longer there. The young people are no longer there. We lost a whole generation. Within maybe a 15-year period, we lost a whole generation of young people, and they walked away from the church, And we've seen the largest exodus of young people from the church since the time Protestantism started in Korea. And so they know that church is all about politics and business and hypocrisy and everything like that. And so it's interesting that when the outbreaks happened in Itaewon, non-Christians, people who don't go to church, were actually saying, well, we should follow what the church did. The church set a good example. Why did the government target the church first? And I think we wrestled with it a lot. Should we close down? Should we have online services? We talked amongst our peers. We talked amongst our colleagues. And then Romans 13, Paul talks about submitting to the authorities, so be subject to the governing authorities. For there's no authority except that which God has established, and so on and so forth. And God has established this authority that we need to follow. I think the church overall did a pretty good job. There's still outbreaks happening amongst churches. As churches reopen and people are coming back, there are outbreaks happening and stuff. But at the same time, like I said, we are opening with a little bit. For the 2 months that most churches were closed, I think it pushed them into new and creative ways of worship. A lot of churches went into parking lot worship, house church worship, the whole online service kind of thing. And for the most part, I think the church was good at keeping their civic duty and complying with what the government mandated. And so for the most part, churches did a good job. For the young people, wow, it's for the young people, I think they have this mentality that they're young. If they get infected, then they get infected. It's not going to be that dangerous for them. They're a little bit more, maybe able to take a risk, with things like that. I was just out the other day in Itaewon meeting some people. I couldn't believe how quiet and dead the whole area was, But still, generally speaking, when you look at the young people, most of them, I'd say, I don't know, what do you think? I'd say about maybe 70-80% are wearing masks and trying to comply, at least in my area. What do you think?
My personal observation, just from, it seems like it goes up and down. Like I'm taking the subway a lot, so I see when people that are high school age or college age, what they're doing, and it seems like the people who are most likely not to wear their masks are high school students. And actually, one of the people who was a confirmed patient in the Latte World thing that happened on the weekend was high school students. So I was totally unsurprised. I saw this picture from The Guardian, and it was showing the Latte World, and you look at the age of the people not wearing the masks, and so it seems like a lot of people are wearing them, but the people that aren't wearing them seem to me to be mostly high school age or college age or maybe late elementary school, because they can go around freely without their parents, and I think maybe their parents are some of the people encouraging them to wear it. And I mean, I'm teaching children, so I ask them how they feel about the virus, and they always tell me that it's scary, and they seem to be concerned about wearing their mask and talking about it. So my overall feeling is that if the outbreak is going to happen anywhere, it's going to be between the ages of like 16 to 35. But The thing is, we found that what was I think it was recently one of the most recent outbreaks actually was among like 40 to 60-year-olds. It was some table tennis club, and I guess
Oh,
people
wow.
weren't wearing
Okay.
their masks. So that
Huh.
sort of threw my paradigm on tilt a little bit. I was like, I wonder what's going on. But I think the one thing that the social aspect of it is like, okay, if these are people you know and it's behind closed doors, no one can judge you for not wearing a mask, and then you feel safe because you're like, oh, I know these people and they're not going to give me coronavirus. So, and personally, I have some thoughts about the virus and how severe it is, but I'm just looking at it from like, well, what should we do in terms of obeying the government and like, are there times where we maybe don't have to wear a mask, or should we just be wearing it as much as possible? And so I struggle with these issues too personally. Like sometimes I'm tired of wearing a mask. I wear a mask all day at work, and I wear a mask on the subway. The only time I don't wear it is maybe if I'm jogging and there's nobody around, or
Right.
at my house. So it wears on you, right? It's been
Sure.
going on for a long time. Maybe you want to speak to that in terms of the Christian community, like, and what you've been experiencing with the kind of what I've tried to describe as corona fatigue. This was something I tried to suggest to people start using this word because it feels like that's where we are with it right now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's for everybody. But I'm kind of surprised that when I these days I work from a cafe, and I just need to get out of the house just so I could focus and do work. And one of the cafes near my house, it's packed out. It's huge, but it's packed out. And there's every time I walk in, there's no seats. I walk in the afternoon, there are no seats because everyone's working, but they're working from home, but from a cafe. They're doing their work or studying or everything else online. They're all in their classes. But then internet, they're all at a cafe for 4 or 5 hours. And I'd say most of the young people do not have masks. They're not wearing masks. They wear their mask when they come in, but they're not wearing their mask inside the cafe. And it's a little bit annoying, but yeah, I feel like everyone's kind of going back into life as usual. But when you go into restaurants and cafes and take public transportation, people are packed into places. And my fear when this whole thing started was the government is one step away from closing down churches. They have this power to close down the church, and that was scary, and since the early beginnings of Christianity in Korea, church services have never stopped. Even during the Korean War, church services continued. But then for the first time, all the church services had to end. And that kind of made me a little bit fearful that, wow, the government has this kind of power and potential to close down the church, and the church followed. Are we doing the right thing? Is this a godly thing? But then I realized, that people have been trying to close down church doors for the past 2,000 years. And Jesus himself says that I'll build my church and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it, Matthew chapter 16. And I think there was a lot of anxiety that, is the government trying to take control of the church and so on and so forth. And but for the most part, yeah, keep talking in circles, but I think we've done a good job in trying to contain it, and even now coming back, as we're trying to restart, and that's another concern is as churches have been closed for almost 2 months, will people come back? Is this exposing the true heart of the Korean church? And maybe I'll address that a little bit more later. But we're seeing that we're seeing a lot of people as churches open their doors, people are not coming back for whatever reason. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a good segue to something I wanted to talk about. So let's just see if I can get this up here. There we go. Let's here. Maybe we can put this up on the stream. So, oh, that's not what I wanted. Okay, let's switch this. So I had the Guardian. There's the Guardian picture for those of you watching the live stream. With all the young people not wearing their masks. I think there's at least 5 people not wearing their masks, covering their face. And I'm going to go now to this was something that actually kind of sparked my interest in having this podcast in the first place. Was this? This is the Barna survey that was talking about church attendance. So I'm just going to read from my notes here a bit. The recent Barna Group survey published something. They were asking churchgoers whether they had streamed their church, another church, so whether they'd streamed their church that they used to attend, or streamed another church online, or neither. The question seemed to be, in the past 4 weeks I have. Now, I have a little bit of a methodological problem with the question, because it seems like it assumes that everybody who said neither didn't do anything, which might be a little bit scary. Maybe they actually still went to their church. Maybe they were still going. They didn't stream another church or their church. I was trying to find it on the Barna website exactly where this data came from, and I couldn't find it. So all I have is this little graphic with this question at the top. But I'm just wondering what you thought about these results. Sorry, I didn't mention the results. So streamed my regular church was 40%. Streamed a different church was 23%, and neither was 48%, and that should be concerning.
That's right. I was reading a quote by A.W. Tozer, and he writes that modern religion focuses upon filling churches with people, but the true gospel emphasizes filling people with God. And a lot of my colleagues and I really had to wrestle with this. That 48% is a big number. Like you said, could they have been doing something else? Were they meeting maybe in other groups? Maybe they were meeting in their own small group. We've heard stories within our church that they were meeting in their own small groups. And even though this was a survey done with American Christians, American church, we find similar kind of thing that's happening with our church as well. And we find that about 48%, maybe about half of our church is not coming back for whatever reason, even though we're opening up. And we're thinking, is it because of fear? Is it because of they want to keep safe? Is it because they don't want to contract, a disease or whatever? That could be it. That could be it. But we're finding that people are not coming back, And so my colleagues and I discussed, should we spend our energy trying to bring those 48% back, or should we focus on the disciples that are truly coming and coming to worship? Is this revealing what the true church right now in Korea is? Because that, frankly, this is the heart of a lot of the problem of the church in Korea, is that people find their identity in filling a church, a pew once a week on a Sunday morning. I'm a Christian because I go to church and I sit in a pew once a week on Sunday morning, and that's why I'm a Christian. And the average Christian in Korea right now, the average church filler, the average pew filler, this bench warmer, or whatever you want to call it, does not know the simple gospel. You ask them, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to follow Christ? Oh, I go to church once a week. I try to pray. I'll go to a prayer meeting every once in a while. I hope God will bless me and bless my kids and my family, and that they'll go to a good college and that God will give me success. Kind of a mixture of maybe like Korean traditional religion, shamanism mixed with Confucianism, mixed with prosperity gospel, and that's what a lot of people are following right now. And do they really know what faith is? Do they really know what it means to believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and that He shed His blood for your sake, and His because you're a sinner, and He died for our sins? And do they know the true gospel? And that's kind of scary. And so there's a lot of fluff in churches, and is Jesus kind of overturning the tables of the temples and the churches today and saying this is what's being uncovered. People are not coming back. People are not. I've talked to a lot of my friends who say they've gotten used to not coming to church anymore, and they actually like it. They filled their void with other things. They filled their void with sleeping in. They filled their void with Netflix movies. They filled their void with so many other things. And that survey could be a wake up call for the church. Have we as pastors failed to make disciples? Jesus never said make big churches. Jesus never said build huge buildings. Jesus never said let's do big programs. But He said make disciples of all nations. Has the church been doing that for the past 100 years here in Korea? Has the church been raising up disciples and worshipers, true worshipers? And it's interesting in what is it, John 4, when Jesus talks to the Samaritan woman, they get into debate about where they should worship. The Jews believe that they have to worship at the temple in Jerusalem. The Samaritans believe that they have to worship at Mount Gerizim, and they actually built a temple which the Jews destroyed. And they got into this argument about where should we worship. Jesus said it's not about where we worship; it's about who we worship. And God is looking for those who worship in spirit and in truth. And so, with this whole COVID-19 thing, is this a revelation, a revealing, an uncovering of what's really happening in the church right now? Is this an uncovering of the wheat and the chaff? Could this be a separation of the wheat and the chaff, or and a revealing of what really lies beneath? Has the church simply been focused on filling the fluff or filling the pews with pew warmers on a Sunday morning? And have we failed in our people in making them carry the cross every day? And we brought down this level of commitment to the lowest common denominator, so that people just get addicted to this comfort. And so this whole identity, I'm a Christian because I fill a pew on a Sunday morning, it's taken away. You can't go to church anymore. You can't go to a place anymore. What are you left with? Am I still a Christian? Am I still a believer?
Right.
And so these are some of the heartfelt discussions that I've been having with friends and so on and so forth. And so I know a lot of parishioners are struggling. A lot of people are struggling, not meeting together and so on and so forth. And it's been hard for a lot of people, wrestling with their faith.
Right. So that's a lot of the sort of personal spirituality and psychology aspects of what people are thinking about when they come to church or don't come to church. And you presented some arguments as to why churches should, try to obey the government, and you pointed to some passages that said, okay, these are things that we should do. But I'd like to push back on you a little bit
Sure.
with regards to those things. I mean, the Bible does say that, I forget which part of Hebrews, but it says that we shouldn't forsake the gathering together. So actually forsaking gathering together with other believers is in some part a sin, depending on how you define that. And then we also have the sacraments, or I guess
Sure.
it's a Catholic term, but the things that people should do together as a community. Like communion. And I remember even before we weren't allowed to attend church that, or not allowed, but asked not to attend, and then the churches voluntarily agreed. That even before that, because of coronavirus, churches were stopping having a communion service. And just this weekend, my home church in Canada, that's still doing live streams, they actually had a kind of live streamed communion service. So families would prepare their communion at home, and
Right.
then you would do it together, virtually. And so I'm just curious what you think about those 2 points.
Yeah, you're referring to the passage in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25 that says, "Let us not give up gathering together as some are in the habit of doing, but let us, meet together until the day approaches, the final day approaches." It's very right, but I think there are, how should I say? There are. The best way to put it is, yes, it's true. But for now, for the time being, until this coronavirus ends, what's the greater sin? Disobeying the government or not meeting together? Or are any of them sin? And I think we have to use a lot of wisdom. It's a discernment. It's a very complicated matter. These are things that a lot of the pastors have been wrestling with a lot, and we share amongst ourselves. Should most churches could not celebrate Easter this year. We had to do our joint AIM service all online, and so it was very difficult for a lot of the churches this year. But do we listen to the government, or do we follow what the Bible says and still meet together? And so I think these are issues that maybe there can't be a one answer for everything, but every church is doing something on their own to kind of do both, And so I know churches that are meeting in house churches, home groups, and so they'll stream online, but they'll meet in smaller groups, in smaller gatherings. Your family is a church, and so families meet together. I think it's a wonderful thing for families to gather together in church and celebrate. And when you go to church, the whole family separates. The kids go to the youth group, the little ones go to elementary, the children's ministry, the parents go to the big service, and so on and so forth, and they're all spread out. But families are coming together and worshiping together in their houses. That's a church, And so I don't think there's a blanket answer for everything, but I think churches, Christians right now have to have a lot of discernment in how we respond to what the government is saying. And so I believe that the government this week is actually coming out with new mandates for what they could actually close down the churches again if the spread becomes worse. Or they could say, okay, we're going to keep the eased restrictions for now and let things proceed, And so we're waiting on that right now for what the news is going to say about that. Right. But it's a delicate answer, It's a delicate balance act, and once again, we're trying to do both. It's just we see that a lot of people will come out of this. A lot of Christians will come out of this either much deeper with God, much more intimate with God, much more closer to God, or we'll see a lot of people totally far away from God. And so it's going to be an interesting time of what happens after all this kind of ends.
The virus has actually presented a number of challenges, and I think has also presented some opportunities for the church. And you kind of hinted at one in terms of the church becoming an example of obedience to the government with the restrictions and being an example to other places like nightclubs and that kind of thing. And it was
Sure.
kind of interesting to this actually happened at my work, was that I work with the children, and parents are concerned with the Itaewon aspect of it. They were concerned with okay, there are foreigners working at this place,
right?
And did they go to Itaewon, or what happened? And my boss, when they called, my boss was telling them, well, actually this particular foreigner, he doesn't go to those places. He's usually at church, and the parents didn't seem upset that I was going to church, but that's what she was telling them, I guess. Which was an interesting kind of witness, and I've been talking with her about how we don't go to church, like we were doing the social distancing and doing it online and stuff, and it was interesting to see that happen. But I'm just curious if you've noticed. Well, I think maybe first let me just give one more example. I found that churches have become a kind of supportive community in the interesting and unique social distance ways that we can. One thing that came to mind for me was that I reconnected with my home churches back in Canada. A couple pastors that I knew and from Canada and still really respect. I've been able to reconnect with them and participate with some of their live content. So there's been a couple of things for me that have been really beneficial. So where do you see some opportunities for the church in this particular aspect?
Yeah, so when we first did our live stream services, we didn't know, but our live stream went all over the world. People, we got messages from Cambodia, from Africa, from the United States, from different parts of the world. Somehow people just linked in and they were able to watch our service. And then even within Korea, as we're opening up, when I asked people how they found out about our church, or what they why they came to our church, as people are coming back, we're seeing a new stream of new visitors, new people coming to our church. And when we asked them how they heard about us, they said, "Oh, we saw the live stream, and we saw your service and liked it and want to check it out for ourselves." And so we're seeing that as well. We love that a lot of places all over the world right now, a lot of churches have closed down. They don't have the live stream capacity in their churches like we do here in Korea. And so a lot of the missionaries and pastors and a lot of Christians all over the world have been tuning in to our services here in Korea. because the time difference is relatively similar. I've gotten contacts from Cambodia saying that, we're a missionary family, and we just we worship together in our house, watching your live stream, and so we've gotten a lot of that. And so it's been good in a lot of ways too. It's definitely brought our leadership team together, because we had to work through the whole coronavirus thing. We had to people had to come together. We had to work together. There were weeks where we only worshiped with 12 people in the room, all of our leaders, and everybody had a different role. And now as people are coming back too, we feel like there's more of a communal aspect. It feels like when we first planted our church 3 years ago, even though the numbers are much lower, it just brings us back to the memories of when we first started our church, and we were one family, and everybody knew each other. And before the coronavirus, our church had a lot of momentum. We were growing. We were actually looking for new venues, for a bigger venue for service, and then we finally decided that instead of a new venue, we'll go to a second service. And we were just about to prepare a launch of a second service, and then coronavirus hit and everything stopped. And so it's kind of bringing us back to our real identity. What is worship? What is church? What does it mean? Is just being a Christian, just coming to church once a week, and filling up a pew. And so all these things, coronavirus actually was a blessing to the church in a lot of ways as well. It was a blessing. I think it was a blessing to the church in Korea too. We might not be able to see everything right now, but I think things will be uncovered, and I think it's a way for the church to be purified, be more Christ-like, become the gods of all these things that churches have been focusing on. Our higher attendance numbers, or building projects, or our expansive budgets, which are all okay things, but all in the name of God's kingdom. It's almost like I feel like the coveting of things that are hidden under Achan's tent in Joshua chapter 7. He hid these idols, these things that he hid under his tent. And in the same way, these things that are hidden in our hearts are slowly becoming uncovered. And what is the church all about? What do we value? What do we love? What are the true gods that we worship? So I think it's an interesting time, and I think it's a good time. And God loves His church, and God wants the church to be purified, and He loves His bride so much. And I look forward to how things will turn up on the other side.
All right. Well, this has been View from the Han with our special guest, Pastor Leo Rhee. Thank you for joining us. All right. Here we go. All right, Pastor Leo, just hang on there for a second.
Sure.